Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. And in this video what I want to do is talk about destructuring and closures. I've done videos on closures before, I've done videos on destructuring before, but I thought I'd wrap both concepts into one video because they're so useful. Okay, so first let's just reestablish what destructuring is. It's just basically a way of working with collected variables in a way that's just a little bit easier. Okay, so what are the different ways we can collect information inside of JavaScript? The two main ways are objects and arrays. So we'll show you how to use restructuring with both of them. So let's see here. First, let's make an array. Const my array equals 1, 2, 3, 4. No. 3, 4, whatever. Okay. So to use array destructuring, what it means is to take the stuff inside the array and put them into their own separate variables. Okay? And basically the way you do this is you start with declaring a new variable. So the const keyword tells JavaScript, oh, you're declaring new variables. But instead of just giving a variable name, I'm going to put an array. Okay? And what this tells JavaScript is, oh, you want us to break down an array eventually. And where you want us to break it down is going to be listed in this fake array. So let's say the first variable 1, I want to store it in a variable called 1. Then 2, and then 4, 5, 6. Instead of doing another one for 4, then 5, then 6, which I could do, let's skip 4. So I can skip 4, just put a comma, and it'll just skip over 4. And then I want to put 5 and 6 in one variable. So then I can use what's called the rest operator and say put the rest in 5, 6. Okay? And then what you do equals my r. So the way this works is that this tells JavaScript, this is your format to break down this array. So we're going to look at this array. The first element, 1, gets stored into 1. The second element, 2, gets stored into 2. The third element, 4, gets stored in, well, nowhere, because we skipped it. And then the rest gets put, which is 5 and 6, gets put into this variable called 5 and 6. So now if I were to console.log the three variables, console.log, watch what happens. 1, 2, 5, 6. Testing or node. Okay, first let me go to CD into practice. Node testing.js, and you see the 1 is a separate variable, the 2 is a separate variable, and then the remainder, the 5, 6, got stored in that last variable, and 4 is nowhere to be found because we skipped it. So that's array destructuring in a nutshell. That's how array destructuring works. But you can do something similar with objects. So let's do it with objects. Okay, let's see here. And let's do my obj. We'll just do the normal name, Alex, age 34. Okay, so it's the same idea. I do const to say, hey, I'm declaring a new variable. But then when I put brackets, it tells, oh, we're gonna make a new variable, but we're gonna break down an object. Okay, so where do you want me to store this stuff? So then I'd say, I want to store name and age. Okay, and the way this works, because again, I'll put my object over here, and since these aren't in a particular order, because objects, the properties aren't stored in a particular order, it relies on the variable name. So it's going to look for a variable, a property called name in my object, and then store it in name. It's going to look for a property called age in my object, which is 34, and then store 34 in this variable called age. Okay, and if I do this, console.log name and age, save, then we run the code. See, I have Alex stored in name and age stored in 34. I didn't have to do my obj.name or my obj.age. I was able to break it down into a separate thing. Okay, which makes life, just makes my code look a little cleaner because I don't have to worry about all that dot notation everywhere. Okay, but what if I have multiple objects and I don't want the variable to be called name. I want the name property, Alex, but I don't want to call it name. Then I can do this. I can be like name and then say hello. So the variable is not going to be called hello. So instead we'll console log hello. Save. See, Alex 34. So basically you can change the name of the variable. What else can I do? Okay, let's add another property. So we'll just say email. Alex Merced at alexmerced.dev. Okay, what I could do is maybe I just want the name broken away. Okay, and then I want everything else that's in the object to be stored in another object. So I'll just use the rest operator again, kind of like I did with the array, and just make a variable called the rest. And then what it does, it takes any properties that have not been destructured, broken apart, and stores the rest of them in this variable called the rest. So now if I do this, name the rest, save. Huzzah! See, Alex is all by itself because we broke apart name. And then you have an object that has the remaining properties, age and email. Okay? And literally you can use this anytime you're passing an object or an array. That's what makes this a lot of fun. So that makes this a lot of fun when it comes to functions. Okay? So for example, let's say I have objects, let's say lots of objects that look like this. And there's a function that I use them with. It's called, print name. So we'll do const print name equals, and I expect that you're going to pass this object into it, right? So since I know this object, I'm expecting this object to come into it. I'm going to destructure that object on the way in. So then I can just be like name, age, email. And it will just break down that object that I passed into my function into 3 variables, name, age, and email. So then now I can do this. Okay, I can then console.log name, console.log age, and then console.log email. Okay, save. Now let's actually run that function. Print name my obj. Okay, and the nice thing about that, see, this is just easier to write. Name, age, email. Because I know, like, this function will only work if you pass in an object with those 3 properties, or else it won't have those variables. Okay, that's just the way my function works. Save. That's why good documentation matters. So people know what they need to put into these functions. What do they need to pass as an argument? So if I run it, and there you go. See, it console logged Alex, the name. But see, it didn't have to do like my obj.name. It just said name, then age, then email. So it all worked. Now let me do this. I'm going to actually return an array. And that array is going to have name, age, email. So I'm actually returning an array with the properties. So I put in an object, it broke it apart, and then returned it as an array. But watch what I can do now. I can destructure the return value of the array. Okay, so I can be like const. Once again, this is an array, so the function returns an array. So an array is going to come out of the function. So I'm going to destructure the array. I know because I designed the function, I can see it on the screen, that array is going to have name come first. So first I'm going to do name. Oh, no, not there. First name, then age, then email. Okay, and then that's going to equal print name my obj. So I'm putting my object, this thing, into the function, which gets destructured because the parameters get destructured, and then it console logs all those variables, but then returns them as an array, and when that array gets returned, it gets destructured into this array. Well, it gets destructured into these variables. And now I can just do it again. Console.log name. Actually, I can just copy and paste this from over here. Don't repeat yourself. Okay? And it's going to have these variables accessible to it because I just declared them here. Because again, these variables are only scoped within the function, which will lead to our next conversation about closures. So now if I run this code, let's see what happens. I hit no testing, and you see, first in the function, it prints the 3 variables, and then outside of the function, after it gets destructured, it prints the 3 variables again. Okay, so that's the story there. Okay, so now we've established sort of destructuring and sort of all the cool things you can do with destructuring. I mean, yeah, actually that's pretty good coverage. Now, knowing this, what else can we do? Okay, let's use closures. Because again, the point is, when you take a look at a lot of React hooks, a lot of it is just destructuring and closure magic. Okay, and what's the concept of a closure? The concept behind a closure is that I have a function, so let's say const parent, so this is my parent function, equals, no parameters, this. Okay, and we're going to have a variable called const myvar equals 5. Okay, now the problem is that myvar variable only exists within that function, because again, scope block scoping. So a variable only exists when the curly brackets, when you're using const and let, only exists within the curly brackets that you declared it in. Okay, so the minute this function ends, myvar disappears into the ether. Okay, and just to show you that, console.log myvar, if I run this code, it's going to error because myvar doesn't exist by the time this console log runs. I'm going to run the function first too. So parent, invoke the function, save, and then no testing. See, myvar is not defined. But what I can do is I'll define another function inside of this. So we'll call this const child equals, and then basically we'll just pass in no parameters, and then pass in this, and what it's going to do is return my var. And it has access to my var because this whole function is within these curly brackets where my var does exist. So that my var variable is still available in there. But how am I supposed to call this function? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to return it. I'm going to return the function. Okay? So I'm going to return child. So then what I'm going to do instead is say const child, because I'm going to name the function child, equals parent. So when this function runs, it's going to create the variable myvar, and then create a function called child. I'm going to return that function, store it in this variable called child again. Okay, actually what I'll do is I'll change this to child inside, so that way we can separate between being inside the function versus outside the function. And then here I'm storing in this variable called child outside. Okay, because that's the function that this returns. So this returns child inside, and I store it inside child outside. And now if I do this, child outside, and call that function, well, let me save it. See, 5. I get the number 5. Now how am I supposed to get that 5 when it's over here? Technically it shouldn't exist here. Shouldn't exist at this point in my code. But it exists because I am calling a function that was created somewhere that has scope. So since this function was defined in here, it has enough scope to be able to reach those variables. And that's what makes Clojure so interesting. You can create functions inside functions that have access to variables within the parent function. And that's pretty much how React is able to make functional components work. Okay, because people are like, how does like use state and all these hooks work? Because they're essentially defining functions within functions, and they're defining the data. So when you're defining, I mean, you don't need to look under the hood, but it's defining all these variables within the useState function, and then the useState function then returns you a function that has access to that data, and basically operates almost as if you had a class component, which is really, really cool. Okay, so now imagine this. Let's say we return this function as an array. Okay, so it's basically an array with one thing inside of it. Well, then I would just destructure it like this. Again, destructuring if an array comes back. So basically I'm saying, hey, the first thing in this array that comes back from the function, put it in here, which is the function. That's essentially what happens when you're using React and you're putting in like state and then useState in that array. And if you haven't used React hooks yet, you should eventually learn those. Those are pretty cool. But again, this is essentially all that's happening. This function is returning an array with a function inside of it, and you're just destructuring it into this variable. Hey, and same thing. If I did this, okay, if I returned an object, now here we have to modify this a little bit, because it's going to return an object with a property called child inside, which has the function inside of it. So what I'm going to have to do is if I want to keep this way, I have to first change this to curly brackets, because now I'm destructuring an object. No longer, because again, this returns an object now. And I got to make sure I put the right property name. So child inside, because the object is going to have a property called child inside, but I can rename it child outside. So that's where I can use that renaming syntax we saw earlier. And if I do that, my code should still run. So yeah, I still get 5. Because this function returns an object, I destructure the property that has the function inside of it into this variable, and then I invoke the function I stored in that variable, and ta-da! I have access to this 5 that's over here. And again, I just point that out because, again, a lot of the hooks, you're destructuring the output, because the way the hooks work is that you'll put this information inside of a function, and then the function returns you functions. Okay, and then you use those functions within your React code. Because what it is doing is technically you're storing all this data in that closure, in that parent function, and it's returning you functions that allow you to access that data. And that's kind of the common theme behind all these different React hooks. And once you appreciate that, it's just really clever. And then that's why you're destructuring the output in all those hooks, because it's just an easy way to grab the results. So you don't have to destructure it. You could just store everything in one variable. Like I could just sit there instead, just call this like, the result. So then if I were to console log the result, I'm just getting back an object with that property inside of it. So I go, whoop, see, child inside. There's a function inside of an object, or a function inside of an object. And then I could just be like result dot child inside. So this would work just fine, but it doesn't look as pretty. It doesn't feel as suave. Okay, but again, closure is it's just an interesting way of using functions to store information and return functions to manipulate that stored information. So it allows you to kind of create data that doesn't exist within a certain scope, but still be able to manipulate those variables within that scope. Okay, which is pretty cool. So basically, in the case of React hooks, to have the data stored in that useState function, but you're able to use it in your functional component because the useState function gives you these functions that allows you to access that stored data. So as your component renders and re-renders, that information doesn't disappear because it's been scoped away in a sense, which is really cool. Okay, so hopefully that helped you learn some things and appreciate some things and learn some new tricks. My name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. If you haven't used React yet, it's something you should definitely learn if you're a JavaScript person at some point. It really does open up your mind to thinking about your programming in different ways, and opens you up into using a lot of functional practices in your programming that I feel has definitely made me a better programmer in general, even when I'm not using React. So have a great day and enjoy.